Good morning, class. This is Miss Anderson here with 5.2 notes, congruent polygons. Today's essential question is being able to identify and corresponding parts of congruent figures. So if you need to write that down, go ahead and pause quick, but you want to identify corresponding parts of congruent figures. What is a congruent figure? A congruent figure is something in geometry is like a shape that has the same size and the same shape. So for example here, we have two triangles and we can see that they have some corresponding pieces. Like this side BC is congruent to DF. They have the same one tally mark. We have BA that's congruent to EF. They have the double tally marks. And then AC is congruent to DE. And then we have the matching angles. So like angle B and F are congruent. A and E are congruent, and then C and D are congruent. So we could say that triangle, and I'm going to go BAC is congruent to triangle. And then it's really important the order that you do this. So I started with angle B, and angle B was congruent to angle F, so I have to put F first so that those match up. And then I did angle A next to my first one, and A is congruent to E, so E has to come second in my triangle naming of the second one. And then I did C, and that's congruent to D, so C and D go together. So triangle BAC is congruent to triangle FED. So we want to match up the congruent pieces when we name the triangle. And then that also tells me that BA, so side BA is congruent to side FE right there. We can see that those have the same markings. Or side AC is congruent to ED, AC is congruent to ED, and then remember we can do the first and last one. So BC is congruent to FD. So that comes, we did do this a little bit in naming angles and stuff in Unit 1, so they have to match up congruently. So a pair of sides or angles that have the same relative position in two congruent figures are called corresponding parts. So corresponding parts is referring to the angles and or the side lengths. So we could say, like from our first example, that the corresponding parts would be that A is congruent to E, and B is congruent to F, and C is congruent to D, which we can get from the picture or we can get from this statement, because A lines up with E, they're both in the middle, or AB, which is the same as BA, and FE or EF are the same. So we can pick out the corresponding parts from the picture or the statement. We're going to have to practice that. The statement is what I wrote up here. So that's this statement, and just a reminder that the order does matter again. The order of the vertices indicates the corresponding parts, like I've been talking about. If third angles theorem says that if two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then the third angle must be congruent. And that means, and that's true because they have to add up to 180. So basically it says that if A and D are the same, and then B and E are the same, then C and F must also be the same. And that is just like if this one is 40 and this one is 40, and then this one is, I don't know, 100, and this one is 100, then this one must also be 40 because it has to add up to 180. So they all have to add up to 180. So if these two make 140 and these two make 140, then there's only 40 left over for the third. All right, so writing a congruent statement means that you want to make sure that the corresponding parts line up. So how you name your first triangle doesn't matter as much. I'm going to go from the marking, so I'm going to do LJK because it goes 1, 2, 3, but it really doesn't matter which order you go in for the first one. So I'm going to say triangle LJK is congruent to triangle, and then for the second one, it does matter. So you have to find the angle that's congruent to L, which in this one would be R. So L comes first and R must come first. Then it goes J and T are congruent. So I did J second, so T comes second. And then K and S are congruent, so those must line up. So K and S must both be the third spot on your congruency statement. And then this will also give us our list of corresponding parts. So L and R are congruent angles. So angle L is congruent to angle R. J and T are both in the middle. So J and T are both in the middle. We can see that on our diagram or from our congruency statement. K and S are on the end. So K and S are congruent. So those are the angles. And then the sides you can get from your diagram. So JK and ST, or you can get that from your congruency statement. JK and ST, or in ours would be JK and TS. So JK and TS. But ST and TS are the same thing. So it's a segment, you can go either way. You can get from the diagram, or you can use your congruency statement. So like LJ and RT would be the first two. So those are congruent, LJ and RT. And then the last one is the first and last letter. So LK and RS. So LK and RS. And if you have a picture, you can use that to confirm LK and RS both have the double marking showing that those are congruent. So that's the congruency statement, and then the corresponding parts are all the angles and all the sides that are congruent. If you have a trapezoid, it works the same way. The thing about the trapezoid is that in the congruency statement, anything with more than 3 sides, so 4, 5, or 6 sides, you don't have to draw the shape in front like you do with the triangle. So for a trapezoid, you would just name it, and we could do A, B, C, D, and then that would be congruent, then match up the pieces. So A has 4 marks, so that would go with E. So E would come first. And then I did B next. B has 1 dash, so that would go with F. Then I did C. C is 2 markings, and that would go with 2 markings over here would be G. And then D has 3, and that would go with H. So then the angles that would go together would be A and E, the first 2 from each. Then B and F would go together, which you can see on your diagram or from here. So C and G. And then D and H. And then the sides would be any of the combinations of the 2 in order. So you could do A, B would be congruent to E and F. And you could do the middle 2 letters. So B and C is congruent to F and G, the middle 2 over here. The last 2, so C and D, congruent to G and H. And then the first and last, so A and D congruent to E and H. So very similar to the triangle, you just don't need the symbol in front if it's anything over 4 sides, or 4 sides or more. All right, I'm gonna skip number 3. It's very similar to the one that I already did. We'll do B though, because this one shares a common side. And so WN is used in both triangles. So I'm going to mark this one, and W and N go together because they are the same side for each. So if you wanted to redraw this, and sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it makes it a little bit more confusing, but you could redraw it if you'd like. So you got the 2 markings there, 1 here and 3 here, and then we had 2, 1, 3. And then to redo this one, we would do W, N, I, and you got your 2 markings here and your 3 up here and 1 here, and then it was WI was 1, this was 2, and then this one was 3. So that gives you a visual to show that they are 2 separate triangles, but they share the WN line. So the WN line is the same side for each of those 2 triangles. So then we could say that triangle, let's do NTW is congruent to triangle, and then over here, N is actually the same as W, so they're kind of flip-flopped. So in our diagram, we could say that this N is the same as this W down here. So you got to be careful there. So when we start with N, we actually want to start with W on this side. And then I and T are the same, so I would come first. And then W in the first one is N in the second one. So it would be NTW is congruent to triangle WIN. So just matching up those congruent pieces is really important. Looking at the angles that go together is the easiest way to do that. All right. If we know that these triangles are congruent, we can use it to solve our problems. So we know that, so we're going to say that these two triangles here are congruent. And then we have this mark here that shows that C and D are the same. So that means that this is also 65 degrees. And we know that this is 90 degrees, which means that we can do 90 and 65, which would give me 155. And then 180, since the three angles in a triangle have to make 180, and then subtract 155, and that would leave me with 25 left over. And so that means that X here has to be 25, and this angle would be 25 degrees. So that's how we could use this to help us solve. Let's do a couple more. So in this diagram, we have TJM, triangle is congruent to PHS. So just using this congruency statement, I can match up some of my angles. So if I look at the angle M, I know that that's going to be congruent to angle S. So I could say that angle M is congruent to angle S. And then remember, if it's measure of angle M means that I want the degree measure. So I have angle S and angle M are congruent, and S is 48 degrees, which means that this would also be 48 degrees. And then I have angle P is the first one here, so that would be congruent to angle T. And then down here, I want the measure of angle P. So since T and P are congruent and T is 73 degrees, this one would also be 73 degrees. Now I'd be able to find J and H by subtracting those from 180. But then I'm looking for side lengths here. So I have JM side length. So J and M are the last two letters. So that corresponds to H and S for the last two letters. So JM is this piece right here, and that is congruent to HS, which would be this piece right here. So I don't know that measurement, but I know that they are congruent. And then I have MT here, MT, and remember without the line, so if I put the line, that's referring to the segment. And if I just put the MT without the line, that is asking you to find the length of that segment. So that's a little bit of review of our vocab. So I'm looking for the length of this segment. So looking back to our statement up here, MT is the first and last letter. So the first and last letter here would be P and S, or if we want to put it in the same order, it would be S and P. And I want the measurement, and that is 5 centimeters right here. And then we're rewriting the triangle congruency. So triangle HPS, so rewriting it in a different order. So looking up here, H was in the middle, so I'd have to rewrite, if H is first, I'd put J, the middle one, first. And then P lines up with T, so P and T, so I would put T next, and then S goes with M, so M last. So that's how we could rewrite that triangle congruency statement. There are 6 different ways to write that, so there are multiple options for writing the congruency statements. You just have to make sure that they match up correctly. All right, a couple more quick. In this diagram, we have the four sides, so you can see it doesn't have a shape. So it says that D is congruent to S, so D and S go together, so I can label this one 102 degrees. And then we have E and P go together, so E and P go together right here. And then F and Q go together, so F and Q. So this one is also 68 degrees, and then R and G are the last two. So R and G is both 84 degrees then. So it looks like I can solve for y because I know that angle Q is congruent to angle F, and so that's 6y plus x is equal to 68 degrees. And it looks like I actually need to find x first because it has an x and a y, so we'll hold off on that. It looks like we can find our x equation is QR. So QR, the last two letters, so that would be corresponding to FG. So looking down here, FG is this one. So that means that since QR is congruent to FG, we could say that 2x minus 4 is equal to 12. We will add the 4, and we're going to get 2x is equal to 16. Divide by 2, x is equal to 8. Then we can plug that back in up here. So we got x is equal to 8. And then we have 6y plus 8 is equal to 68. Subtract, and then 6y is equal to 60. Divide, y is equal to 10. So that helps us find our x and y. So matching up the corresponding pieces in the right places helps us to find those values. I am running out of time because I have to go sub, so I think that I'm going to have to end the video here. Hopefully this was enough information to try these ones. Number 4 is very similar. I will finish it and post the completed notes. So why don't you give it a try, and then you can look on Schoology to see if you got the answers right. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Whoops.